We're all human. So we, of course, want completely contradictory things. We want novelty. We want security, familiarity. We struggle to find the right balance. Marriage may look like it sacrifices too much on the novelty side without even providing very much security, given the high divorce rate. But each of you will try to find the answer that's right for you. We don't know what that will be. But there are some things we do know. We know that the average age for getting married in Hungary has been rising over the last few decades. It's now higher than most of you are. What that means is that many of you are not married, but marriage or some sort of commitment to another person for the long haul will be a question for you soon. Here's something else we know, including from an earlier slide. We know that the divorce rate in Hungary rose steadily over 50 years, peaking in the 1980s. That's the yellow line. And the purple line is the marriage rate. It's dropped even more dramatically over the same time period. As you've heard, it's bumped up a bit in the last few years, but it's still below what it used to be. That's true on both sides of the ocean. What that means is that many young adults today grew up without a close-up view of what a successful marriage actually looks like, or perhaps even a successful relationship. What people do then, starting in childhood and going on through adolescence, is to construct a fantasy of what a successful marriage ought to look like from movies, stories, romantic fantasies. What else can we do? The less experience we have with real-life, lasting relationships as we grow up, the more that fantasy turns into some sort of idealized fairy tale. And that's a problem, because when our own relationship stops looking like that fairy tale, we're likely to say, well, I guess this one just wasn't it. Or to use the metaphor of the day, I guess this is past its expiration date. Yes. What Jackie and I hope to do over the next few minutes is to help you avoid making that mistake a few years down the road. And if you do want to be with the same person for 10,000 weekdays or more, to give you a better idea of how to do it. And most of this applies to the relationships that you're in right now. It's not secret advice for married people. Here's what we think we've seen over 40 years of working with couples and individuals and watching people's lives, including our own. We've been married for more than 40 years. To each other.
That's an important point.
Yeah. It's a kind of law of motion for all human relationships. At any point in time, two people are either moving closer together or further apart. There's no alternative. You can't hold it fixed. Now, I know some of you are already thinking, well, that's just not true. I don't see it. Particularly those drifts apart are so gradual that we don't see them. What we can see, though, is where those drifts get us. To those moments, even in the best of relationships, where we feel distant, disconnected, not so loving, and we ask ourselves, what's wrong with us? The answer is nothing. That's just the nature of things. And those drifts apart are dangerous, but they're not fatal if we can understand them. This is true for all relationships, not just romantic ones. Here's a familiar one. Children need to reconnect with a parent before they can go off to explore the world. But then they do. Watch the baby, reconnect, get curious about the world, bounce off to explore, come back. Closeness attained inevitably starts a drift apart. We fall in love, We become lovers. We share the excitement of getting to know each other better and better, becoming closer and closer. We should probably be looking at grown-ups doing that. For a while, nothing else matters. But it can't go on forever. At some point, the very closeness and comfort of love, the security of it, allows our attention and our energy to turn outward again, to other things, and yes, to other people. We become absorbed in our work, in our studies, in our favorite activities, in our friends, in our children. We become a little less attentive, a little less curious, a little less engaged with our old familiar love. That's not a bad thing. It lets us lead more interesting lives. As long as we remember on a regular basis to do something to pull each other back in. Because drift apart becomes dangerous if it goes on for too long. We can feel estranged, as though we're with a stranger. We can feel our love is just gone. We can panic and start to think about escape. The good news is what develops in lasting relationships is a kind of tide-like motion, an ebb and flow of closeness rather than an ending. The very movement apart, our separate experiences, allow us to become curious about each other again and recapture that joyful feeling of moving towards each other and discovering something new there. There are differing timescales for these movements. There's a short-term movement that most of you know about, the way in which we tend to drift apart, feel less connected during those busy weekdays, and reconnect over the weekend, conversation, time alone together, making love. These short-term shifts in closeness are embedded in much longer cycles of drift and re-engagement. The longer cycles are easier to miss and more dangerous because we suddenly discover this feeling of distance between us. It's nobody's fault. What usually interferes with the reconnecting are just the events of ordinary life. The things that just get in the way of our chance to reconnect. Things like, again, the demands of work, exams, travel, sickness, babies. Couples whose relationships last have an intuitive feel for these rhythms. They have a kind of internal distance alarm. It goes off when the drift apart has been going on for too long. These couples take it seriously. They don't just dismiss it as some sort of neurotic insecurity. They take action. They do something about it. That action can be a conversation. It can actually be a fight, a sexual seduction, some new activity that's shared, or simply arranging for some undistracted time alone together. Not an easy thing to do in our too busy lives.
Well, now that Richard told you a little bit about the ebb and flow notion, let's talk about some applications and how it really looks in real life. First of all, there's a kind of principle that we all learned in kindergarten or when we were very young about taking turns with the dump truck or with the best slide in the playground, but we sometimes forget it as grown-ups. And that means that this reconnecting job that Richard talked about, where you have to have some time to reconnect, should be shared by both people. It shouldn't be that you say, oh, well, he's the man, he should do it. Or if you look at other relationships, that's my mom, she should be the one to call. Or my best friend loves to do the calling, I'll just wait for her to call. It's very important. The relationship is much stronger if you share that responsibility for the reconnecting. And when it's one of our central relationships, like with a lover or a parent or a child, we don't have so much trouble saying, why haven't I heard from you? It's been a whole week. I want to hear from you. That's not so hard, but when it's a good friend, and this is especially true in our country of America, it's all too easy to postpone it. and to say, oh, well, I have so much to do. I shouldn't call this week. So if I, for example, want to see my old, very good friend Laura, I might call her up and say, can you come out to supper on Thursday? I'd love to see you. And she might say, I can't do it that night. I have a work obligation. So then I wait a couple of weeks and I say, well, how about Saturday? We could go on a hike. And she says, I can't. I have to see my family. And all of a sudden I might start worrying. Has Laura gotten sick of me? Next time I better wait for her to call. But there's always the danger that Laura had some really busy obligations and she didn't stop liking me at all. And she's waiting for me, who she thinks of as the caller, to keep calling. And so those relationships become a little bit more fragile. And in America, where everybody tries to be so self-sufficient and pretend that they love being alone all the time, people really sometimes put aside the obligation to initiate seeing their friends, which actually brings to mind a kind of metaphor that I found very helpful. If you think of yourself like a signal tower, and you think of all your beloveds, all your friends as signal towers, everybody's giving off little lights like those big towers that have red lights at the top of them. And all of us are looking for signals from everybody else's tower to see if we matter. And so if somebody silences their signal, or they give off a very faint signal, gradually you start to wonder, well, do I matter? Why is that person silencing their signal? And it might be that they're trying not to be a bother, or they're trying not to be too needy. But in fact, that silencing of the signal is something that causes people around to stop doing their part in terms of connecting and friendship. So it's a really dangerous thing to try too hard to silence your signal. And bear in mind that everybody's surveying the surround to see where the signals come from. And the signals can be as simple as calling somebody up and saying, how are you? Or texting them. Which in fact brings to mind, how does the distance alarm really look in real life? Well, if you wake up in the middle of the night and think, I forgot to call back my friend Mary, that's your distance alarm going off. And you don't want to the next day think, oh, I was having trouble sleeping. I just have these thoughts in the middle of the night. They don't mean anything. They do mean something. If you start waking up from sleep thinking about what you forgot to do, that is your distance alarm, and you should, in fact, call the next day. And Richard's going to talk about a particular kind of distance alarm.
Yeah. Special case of the distance alarm. It's called jealousy. Special case for intimate relationships. I assume we've all felt it. It can be ugly. It can be dangerous. It can also be protective. It's just that distance alarm going off in crisis mode, and we need to pay attention to it, not just ignore it because we're all so open-minded and modern. Temptation is also a very old-fashioned sounding idea, but you may have noticed temptation is alive and well in the modern world, and someone new can often be very tempting. It's so easy to just slide closer and closer. Jealousy, a gentle jealousy, not the raging, screaming, waving a gun kind, can let a couple know when, with all of this movement back and forth, someone is drifting a little too close to another and needs a course correction before the relationship is in real trouble. Now, of course, some people's distance alarms are much too active. They're too insecure. Any drift at all feels like a catastrophe. They can drive their partner crazy. They can drive their partner away. It's easy to recognize, not so easy to change. Change usually requires therapy or an extraordinarily kind and patient partner. But just a touch of jealousy, that's your distance alarm. So tell your partner what you're worried about, or talk to a friend who can help you get some perspective.
Thank you. You skipped our tower slide.
Oh, no, he was on there.
Oh, it was on? Okay.
Yep.
Well, one slide we've got coming next is something that causes drift in many couples, and it's called the spiral of hurt feelings. It's a very long-winded way of saying these are arguments that seem to come out of nowhere. So what really happens in these is that a couple could be talking along. One person is chattering comfortably and says something that in fact offends the other person, but the other person doesn't want to admit that their feelings are hurt, so they just bide their time. And then 15 minutes later, they counterattack. And the person who started chattering feels that there's an attack out of absolutely nowhere, out of the blue. But they can't resist getting back into it, and pretty soon you've got a whole fight going, and nobody knows where it came from. And this is partly because we were all brought up to feel that we shouldn't talk about our little hurt feelings every few minutes. We should just keep them to ourselves. But what this means is that a huge portion of couples' fights are never comprehensible to either one of them. Let me give you an example. Let's say Joan and William are a couple that come home and talk after work. And Joan is saying, you know, I didn't have such a good day at work. All my coworkers were complaining about how awful the job is and how they're sick of their coworkers. And I just don't like all that complaining. And William is thinking, what do I do every day when I come home from work? I complain. Is she talking about me? Is she really mad at me? But William doesn't let on. He just keeps talking. And then about 10 minutes later, he says, so where exactly is supper? I am famished. Why didn't you have supper ready for me? She says, are you unbelievably childish? I am making supper for you right now. You can see it. Why would you be complaining about supper when I'm making it for you? So these are the kinds of fights that make no sense. And if William had just said, well, do you hate it when I complain about my coworkers? She could have said, no, I have a whole different standard because we're lovers and I don't think that's bad. We have to complain at home. Or she might have said, well, actually, you do complain a little too much. And as somebody just mentioned, I think Jenna, if there was 5 times as much positive in their relationship as there was negative, he just might be able to hear her and hear that sometimes he does complain a little too much. But the fact is that that fight would make sense if William had said what hurt his feelings. And so we feel people should put their pride aside and admit when their feelings are hurt so that they're not having all these completely mysterious fights that seem to come out of nowhere and cause a kind of drift because they feel like they don't understand each other. Now, it's also true that we think if people want their relationship to sing, they ought to have some shared projects. And even more important, they ought to have time alone for those shared projects. And those projects might be as simple as having dinner, having a hike on the weekend, having some time to be together. I mean, all of that time alone is absolutely essential for a couple to be able to be a couple and to be romantically interested. And if you don't make that time, it's not likely to flourish. People will feel like they're out of love because why aren't they making time for each other? But you might think that this means we're in favor of couples being all by themselves and not being part of a social fabric, and that is not true. We feel that couples are much stronger when they're connected, like Bob said, when they see other people, when they have a social fabric that they're part of, and that makes a couple do much better too. And so if we come full circle to why we started talking about marriage originally, the truth is what makes living together unmarried different from living together married is that you have promised to stay together through rough times. And as we just heard, there will always be rough times, difficult times. You have promised in front of a whole group of people who are invested in your staying together. You have a community of people who actually like you and want you to stay a couple, and they will help make your couple's relationship stronger. So that marriage ceremony that so many people say, well, why would I go through that kind of trouble when we're just like married? The fact is it makes your relationship a little more sturdy. And so we thank you for inviting us, and whoever you go into the sunset with, whether you're married to them or not, we hope some of this ebb and flow theory will be of some help. And thank you so much for including us.